The rain lashed against Morgan's face as he inched closer to the edge of the cliff, his heart hammering against his ribs. 50 feet below, the raging river churned and foamed, swollen from days of relentless downpour. But it wasn't the treacherous drop that held Morgan's attention. It was the magnificent creature, balanced precariously on a narrow ledge just below the cliff's edge. The white tiger's fur stood out starkly against the dark rock face, its usually pristine coat now matted and muddy. One wrong move, and the animal would plummet to certain death in the rapids below. "You need to back away now," William shouted from behind, his voice barely audible over the storm. "That's a wild animal, for God's sake." Morgan ignored him, his focus locked on the tiger's eyes, startling blue against its white face, filled with something that looked remarkably like fear. Working at the Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary had taught Morgan to read animals better than most people, and right now this tiger wasn't displaying aggression. It was terrified. "The ledge is giving way," Morgan called back, his trained eye noting the crumbling rock beneath the tiger's massive paws. "We don't have much time. This is insane. That animal belongs to Thorne's private collection. It's not your problem." William's voice cracked with disbelief. "The authorities are on their way. Just wait." Morgan knew William was right. Technically, Theodore Thorne was one of the wealthiest men in the region, a self-proclaimed conservationist who kept an exclusive collection of exotic animals on his sprawling estate. The white tiger, a recent and controversial acquisition, had somehow escaped during transportation and ended up in this life-threatening predicament. But Morgan had never been good at walking away from an animal in distress, regardless of who owned it. That stubborn compassion had cost him his marriage, his comfortable university position, and very nearly his freedom when he'd exposed the mistreatment of research animals at his former employer. The tiger let out a low moan as more of the ledge crumbled away beneath its back paws. There was no time left for debate. "Get the tranquilizer kit from my truck," Morgan instructed, already removing his jacket. "And call Simone. Tell her to bring medical supplies to the sanctuary's back entrance. We'll need to work quickly once I get this animal to safety." William's protests faded into the background as Morgan focused on the task ahead. The plan forming in his mind was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but he saw no alternatives. He secured a climbing rope around a sturdy tree trunk, tested its strength, then wrapped the other end around his waist. "You're going to get yourself killed," William said, returning with the tranquilizer rifle. "And even if you don't, that tiger will probably do the job for you." Morgan loaded a sedative dart, a conservative dose, just enough to calm the animal without causing respiratory depression. "If I don't try, we both know what happens to that tiger. Thorne will blame the sanctuary for its escape and we'll lose our funding. More animals will suffer." Without waiting for a response, Morgan began his descent. The rain-slicked rocks made each movement treacherous. One slip, one miscalculation, and both he and the tiger would be swept away. Carefully, he positioned himself just above the ledge where the tiger now crouched, its powerful muscles tensed. "Easy," Morgan whispered, though he knew his voice did little against the storm's fury. "I'm going to help you." The tiger's ears flattened against its skull, a warning growl rumbling from deep in its throat. Morgan raised the tranquilizer gun, aiming carefully. He would only get one shot, and it needed to be perfect. The dart found its mark in the thick muscle of the tiger's shoulder. The animal roared, more from surprise than pain, swiping at the air with massive claws that could disembowel a man with a single strike. Morgan pressed himself against the rock face, out of reach, and waited. The minutes that followed seemed endless. The tiger's movements gradually became less coordinated as the sedative took effect, but the ledge was crumbling faster than Morgan had anticipated. Just as the animal's legs began to buckle, a large section of rock gave way beneath it. Morgan acted purely on instinct. He lunged downward, somehow finding purchase on the slippery surface, and grabbed the scruff of the tiger's neck just as its hindquarters slipped into empty space. The weight nearly tore his arm from its socket, a white-hot pain shooting through his shoulder. "William," he screamed into the storm, "pull us up, now!" For one terrible moment, Morgan thought William hadn't heard, or worse, had abandoned them. Then the rope began to tighten, and inch by excruciating inch, Morgan and his extraordinary burden were drawn up toward the cliff's edge. The tiger's considerable weight made each movement a battle. The sedative had taken effect, but the animal wasn't completely unconscious. A mixed blessing. A fully sedated tiger would be dead weight, even more difficult to maneuver, but an aware tiger, even a drugged one, remained dangerous. Morgan's muscles screamed in protest as he guided the semi-conscious animal upward, fighting against gravity, the storm, and the tiger's occasional struggles. By the time William's hands reached down to help pull them over the edge, Morgan's vision was tunneling from exertion. They collapsed together on solid ground, the tiger breathing heavily but alive, and Morgan, drenched and trembling from adrenaline and fatigue. "You," William gasped between heaving breaths, "are completely out of your mind." Morgan couldn't disagree. What he'd just done defied all safety protocols and common sense. Yet watching the rise and fall of the tiger's flanks, seeing that magnificent creature still alive despite impossible odds, filled him with a sense of rightness that overshadowed everything else. "We need to move quickly," Morgan said, already pushing himself to his feet despite the protest of his overtaxed muscles. "The sedative won't last long." Together, they managed to transfer the drowsy tiger into the specially reinforced transport cage in the back of Morgan's truck. The sanctuary, located just a few miles away, had an isolation unit where they could assess the animal before any decisions were made about its future. As they drove through the storm, Morgan could feel William's sidelong glances. "What?" Morgan finally asked, keeping his eyes on the rain-slicked road. "Thorne is going to come for his tiger," William said quietly. "You know that, right? And he's not going to be happy about any of this." Morgan's jaw tightened. "That animal was half-starved, Will. Did you see its condition? The dehydration, the stress marks? That's not how you care for a tiger, private collection or not." "I'm not disagreeing with you," William replied carefully. "But Thorne has the governor in his pocket. He's on the board of every major conservation organization in the state. If you make an enemy of him..." The sanctuary's back gates appeared through the rain, and Morgan felt a small measure of relief. "Let me worry about Thorne. Right now that tiger needs medical attention." Simone was waiting for them as promised, the isolation unit prepared. Despite being awakened in the middle of the night, the sanctuary's head veterinarian looked alert and focused, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. "You actually did it," she murmured, as they carefully transferred the still sedated tiger into the secure examination room. "When William called, I thought he was having some sort of breakdown. Morgan nearly got us both killed," William added, though there was a hint of reluctant admiration in his voice. Under the bright lights of the examination room, the tiger's condition was even more apparent. Despite its massive size, easily over 400 pounds, the animal showed signs of malnutrition. Several healing wounds marked its white coat, and an area of fur was missing from its neck, revealing raw skin underneath. "Collar damage," Simone confirmed, gently examining the area. "Too tight, left on too long, and these puncture wounds. Some are defensive, but others..." She looked up at Morgan, her expression grim. "Has someone been baiting this animal?" Morgan felt a cold anger settling in his chest. "Take samples of everything. Document all of it. If what I suspect is true, Thorne's conservation work deserves a closer look." As Simone continued her examination, Morgan stepped outside to make a call. The storm had finally begun to subside, the first hints of dawn lightening the eastern sky. "Jackson, it's Morgan. We have a situation at the sanctuary. I need you to come in early." He paused, listening to the sleepy protests on the other end of the line. "I know what time it is, but we've just rescued a white tiger from Thorne's collection, and things are about to get complicated." By the time he ended the call, Simone had joined him in the hallway. "The tiger's a female," she reported. "Young adult, maybe 4 or 5 years old. She's malnourished, dehydrated, and has several partially healed wounds consistent with forced interaction with other large predators." "Fighting rings," Morgan said flatly. It wasn't a question. Simone nodded grimly. "That would be my professional assessment. There's scarring around her paws as well, possibly from chains or restraints. Whatever Thorne's been doing with this tiger, it wasn't educational outreach." Morgan ran a hand through his rain-soaked hair. "How soon until she wakes up?" "The sedative is already wearing off. Another hour, maybe less." Simone's expression softened slightly. "You did a good thing, Morgan. Whatever happens next, remember that." What happened next, however, would prove to be beyond anything Morgan could have anticipated, as the sun rose fully over the sanctuary, bringing with it the promise of a clear day after the storm. Neither Morgan nor his colleagues could have predicted the shocking revelation that awaited them, or how the white tiger would forever change the course of their lives. The first sign came as Morgan returned to check on the tiger. The animal was awake now, those piercing blue eyes tracking his every movement as he entered the secure room. Unlike most recently captured wild predators, she made no attempt to retreat to the far corner of the enclosure. Instead, she watched him with an unsettling intensity. "How are you feeling, beautiful?" Morgan asked softly, keeping a safe distance from the bars. The white tiger rose to her feet in a fluid motion that belied her injuries and approached the front of the enclosure. Morgan instinctively stepped back, maintaining the safety protocol he'd drilled into every sanctuary employee. What happened next would be debated and discussed for years to come. The tiger lowered her massive head, eyes never leaving Morgan's, and did something no wild tiger should ever do. She chuffed, a friendly, non-threatening vocalization used by tigers to greet those they consider familiar, and then, to Morgan's utter astonishment, extended her massive paw through the bars, palm up, in a gesture that seemed almost human. Morgan froze, his breath caught in his throat. 20 years of working with wild animals had taught him one fundamental truth: predators don't offer gestures of trust, especially not to humans they've just met. Yet here was this magnificent white tiger, extending her paw like a dog might offer its paw to shake. "Simone," he called, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to see this." The veterinarian appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Her eyes widened at the scene before her. "That's unusual behavior," she said, the understatement hanging in the air between them. "It's impossible behavior," Morgan corrected. "Wild tigers don't do this." The tiger withdrew her paw but remained at the front of the enclosure, her blue eyes fixed on Morgan with an intelligence that sent a shiver down his spine. "Unless she's not wild," Simone suggested, approaching cautiously. "Maybe she was hand-raised, a circus animal or private pet before Thorn acquired her." Morgan shook his head. "Even captive-bred tigers don't offer their paws like that. This is something else." As if in response, the tiger made a soft rumbling sound, then deliberately looked toward the water bowl in her enclosure. It was empty. "Is she asking for water?" Simone's voice held a note of disbelief. Morgan moved to the sink along the wall, filled a clean bowl and cautiously approached the enclosure. Following all safety protocols, he placed the bowl in the feeding tray and slid it through to the tiger's side. Instead of immediately drinking, the tiger looked directly at Morgan and made a chuffing sound again, what many experts considered the tiger equivalent of "thank you." "I think we should run some additional tests," Simone said, her professional composure returning. "Blood work, cognitive assessments, something's not right here." Before Morgan could respond, William burst into the room, his face flushed. "Thorn's here," he announced, slightly out of breath. "With lawyers. And the sheriff." Morgan felt his jaw tighten. "Already? How did he know?" "Someone must have tipped him off. He's demanding the immediate return of his property. His words, not mine." Morgan glanced at the white tiger, who had retreated slightly at William's agitated entrance, but showed none of the fear or aggression typical of a wild predator in a strange environment. "Tell them I'll be right out," Morgan said, his voice calm despite the anger building inside him. "And get Jackson to start the cameras. I want everything documented from this point forward." As William left, Simone placed a hand on Morgan's arm. "You know we don't have legal grounds to keep her if Thorn can prove ownership." "I know." Morgan's eyes remained on the tiger. "But something's very wrong here, Simone. That animal was being abused, possibly forced to fight. And there's something else." He hesitated, aware of how it would sound. "She's too aware. Too present." Simone's expression softened. "Just be careful out there. Thorn has resources and influence we can't match." Morgan nodded and headed for the main building, mentally preparing for the confrontation ahead. The sanctuary's gravel driveway now held several vehicles. Thorne's ostentatious black SUV with tinted windows, the sheriff's patrol car, and a sleek sedan that undoubtedly contained legal firepower. Theodore Thorne stood in the center of the sanctuary's modest reception area, a commanding presence in his tailored suit. Though no longer young, his athletic build and perfectly groomed appearance projected vigor and authority. Beside him, Sheriff Daniels looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Mr. Thorne," Morgan acknowledged, keeping his voice level. "This is unexpected." Thorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Is it? You've taken something that belongs to me, Mr. Sullivan. I've simply come to retrieve it." "The white tiger was in distress, hanging off a cliff in the middle of a storm," Morgan replied. "We rescued her and provided emergency medical care." "For which I'm grateful," Thorne said smoothly. "Now that the emergency has passed, I'll be taking her back to my facility where my own veterinary team can continue her treatment." A man in an expensive suit stepped forward, extending a folder. "We've prepared all the necessary documentation confirming Mr. Thorne's ownership and the proper permits for housing an endangered species. We've also included a reasonable compensation for your services." Morgan didn't take the folder. "The tiger shows signs of systematic abuse, Mr. Thorne. Malnutrition, injuries consistent with forced fighting, restraint wounds." "Injuries sustained during her transport and subsequent escape," Thorne interrupted, his pleasant facade beginning to crack. "Accusations of abuse are serious, Mr. Sullivan, and potentially libelous without proper evidence." Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat. "Morgan, I understand your concern, but Mr. Thorne has the proper paperwork. If the animal is his property—" "She's not property," Morgan cut in, his patience wearing thin. "She's a living being who has suffered under Mr. Thorne's care. And as the state-licensed wildlife rehabilitator for this county, I have the authority to hold any animal I suspect has been subject to abuse pending an investigation." "An investigation that would require evidence and probable cause," the lawyer interjected. "Do you have a court order, Mr. Sullivan?" Jackson appeared at Morgan's side, tablet in hand. "Actually, we've already filed an emergency petition for protective custody," he said, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by professional efficiency. "Judge Harrison granted it 20 minutes ago." He turned the tablet around to show a legal document with the judge's electronic signature. Morgan suppressed a smile. Jackson's law degree had proven useful more than once in the sanctuary's history. Thorne's expression darkened. "This is absurd. I am a respected conservationist who keeps endangered animals in substandard conditions," Morgan finished. "The tiger will remain here until the court determines whether your care meets legal standards." For a moment, the tension in the room was palpable. Then Thorne's composure returned, his face settling into a mask of polite determination. "Very well, Mr. Sullivan. We'll do this your way." He adjusted his cuffs, a gesture that somehow seemed menacing. "But understand this, that tiger is extremely valuable to me, and I will use every resource at my disposal to expedite her return." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Sullivan? I'd be careful about getting too attached. Animals that develop unusual behaviors often don't fare well in captivity, even under the most expert care." The implied threat hung in the air as Thorne departed, his entourage in tow. Sheriff Daniels lingered, looking troubled. "You've made a powerful enemy today, Morgan," he said quietly. "Thorne donates half the department's equipment budget. Are you telling me to back down, Paul?" The sheriff sighed. "I'm telling you to watch your back. Thorne doesn't lose gracefully." He adjusted his hat. "I'll need copies of your evidence and that veterinary report." After the sheriff left, Morgan turned to Jackson. "That was quick thinking with the emergency petition." Jackson grinned, his earlier professionalism giving way to his more typical laid-back manner. "I filed it the moment William called about Thorne showing up. Judge Harrison owes me a favor after I helped rehome that alligator that turned up in his swimming pool." "We've bought some time," Morgan acknowledged, "but Thorne was right about one thing. He has resources. He'll be back with more firepower." "Then we better make sure our case is airtight," Jackson replied. "I'll start compiling the documentation." Morgan headed back to the isolation unit, his mind racing. Thorne's parting comment bothered him more than the legal threats. What had he meant about unusual behaviors, and why was this particular tiger so valuable to him? When he re-entered the examination room, He found Simone staring at the tiger with a perplexed expression. "I ran preliminary blood work," she said without preamble. "Her chemistry panel shows elevated levels of several compounds I can't immediately identify. I'm sending samples to the university lab for a more detailed analysis." "Drugs?" "Possibly." Simone bit her lip. "But that's not all. While you were gone, I conducted a simple cognition test, one we sometimes use with primates." Something in her tone made Morgan's pulse quicken. "And?" "She solved it, Morgan. Not by accident or through random exploration. She observed, processed, and deliberately solved a puzzle designed to test abstract thinking." Morgan looked at the white tiger, who was now lying calmly in her enclosure, those unsettling blue eyes still following his every movement. "What are you?" he whispered. As if in response, the tiger rose and approached the bars again. This time she did something even more extraordinary. She began to trace patterns on the concrete floor with her massive paw, deliberate, non-random movements. Morgan crouched down to get a better view, his heart racing. The marks were faint but unmistakable. "Is that—" Simone's voice trailed off in disbelief. "Letters," Morgan confirmed, his mouth dry. "She's trying to write." The crude marks on the floor formed an unmistakable pattern, HELP. The implications were staggering. No tiger, no matter how intelligent or well-trained, should be capable of understanding the concept of written language, let alone attempting to reproduce it. "This isn't possible," Simone whispered, her scientific mind clearly struggling with the evidence before her eyes. "Thorn knows," Morgan realized suddenly. "That's why he wants her back so badly." That's what he meant about unusual behaviors. He straightened up, his decision made. "We need to keep this quiet until we understand what's happening. No records, no reports that mention this specific behavior. Morgan, this could be the most significant scientific discovery in decades. If she's actually demonstrating linguistic capability, then she's in even more danger," Morgan interrupted. "Think about it, Simone. If word gets out about what she can do, every research facility, government agency, and private collector in the world will be after her. She'll spend the rest of her life as a lab specimen." Simone looked torn, the scientist in her clearly at war with her compassion for animals. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but we need to understand what's happening, for her sake as much as anything." Morgan approached the enclosure, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough to establish eye contact with the tiger. "We want to help you," he said, feeling slightly foolish talking to a tiger as if she could understand complex human speech. "But we need to know more." To his astonishment, the tiger began to make more markings on the floor. Cruder this time, harder to decipher, but with Simone's help, Morgan eventually made out what appeared to be THORNEEXPERIM. The message stopped abruptly as the tiger's paw seemed to cramp. She stumbled slightly, a low growl of pain escaping her throat. "She's trying to tell us Thorn experimented on her," Simone said, her voice hushed. "But that's illegal, unethical, monstrous," Morgan supplied, "and exactly the kind of thing a man with unlimited resources and no oversight might do." The tiger had retreated to the back of the enclosure, clearly exhausted by the effort of communication. Her blue eyes remained fixed on Morgan, filled with what he could only interpret as desperate hope. "We need to know more about Thorn's operation," Morgan said firmly. "His research, his facilities, his other animals." "I'll see what I can find," Simone agreed. "But Morgan, we need to be careful. If Thorn really has been conducting some kind of experimental program on endangered species, then he won't stop at legal channels to get her back," Morgan finished grimly. "I know." As night fell over the sanctuary, Morgan maintained his vigil near the white tiger's enclosure. He'd sent the rest of the staff home, insisting he could handle the overnight monitoring. In truth, he wanted time alone with this extraordinary creature, away from the complications of witnesses and documentation. The tiger had been sleeping, but as Morgan settled into a chair with a thermos of coffee, she awoke, regarding him with those intelligent blue eyes. "I don't know what happened to you," Morgan said softly, "but I promise you this. You're safe now. I won't let Thorn take you back." The tiger approached the front of the enclosure again, moving with a grace that belied her size. She made that same chuffing sound, a greeting, a recognition, and then, to Morgan's continued amazement, began to mark the floor again. This time the message was clearer. N-O-T-T-I-G-E-R. Morgan stared at the crude letters scratched into the concrete floor, his mind struggling to process their meaning. N-O-T-T-I-G-E-R. What are you trying to tell me? He whispered, leaning closer to the enclosure. The white tiger paced in obvious frustration, then attempted to write again. Her movements were becoming more labored, the effort clearly taking a toll on her strength. H-U-M-A-N. Morgan fell back in his chair, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. It was impossible, scientifically, biologically, logically impossible. Yet the evidence was literally scratching messages before his eyes. Human, he repeated, his voice barely audible. You're a human. The tiger, no, not just a tiger, made that soft chuffing sound again and nodded her massive head in an unmistakably human gesture. Morgan's scientific mind raced through possibilities. Some form of unprecedented psychological condition. A hoax, a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But none of these explanations fit the evidence before him. With trembling hands, he took out his phone and called Simone. I need you back at the sanctuary, now, and bring Jackson. Within the hour, Morgan's small, trusted team had gathered in the isolation room. He'd shared his incredible discovery, expecting disbelief or even concern for his mental state. Instead, Simone was already examining the tiger with new eyes while Jackson paced the room, legal pad in hand. If, and I stress if, what you're saying is true, Jackson said, then we're not just dealing with animal abuse. We're looking at kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, possibly attempted murder. Not to mention completely unethical human experimentation, Simone added, her voice tight with controlled anger. But Morgan, we need more than scratches on a floor to prove any of this. The tiger woman seemed to understand. She approached the front of the enclosure again and began a new message. P-R-O-O-F-T-H-O-R-N-E-L-A-B. She's saying there's proof at Thorne's lab, Morgan translated. We can't exactly break into his compound based on messages from a tiger, Jackson pointed out. We'd need a search warrant, which requires evidence that would stand up in court. We need to know more, Simone said gently. She addressed the tiger directly. Can you tell us your name, who you are? The tiger began marking again. L-U-C-Y-G-R-A-Y. Morgan quickly searched the name on his phone. Lucy Gray, missing graduate student. There was a case a few years ago, a zoology researcher who disappeared during a field study. The authorities assumed she'd been killed by poachers. The tiger, Lucy, nodded vigorously. But how? William asked, speaking for the first time since entering the room. How is this even possible? Lucy tried to explain through her laborious writing. D-N-A-S-P-L-I-C-E-E-X-P. DNA splicing experiments, Simone translated, her expression horrified. Thorne must have been attempting some kind of genetic modification. But this goes beyond any known scientific capability. Thorne's research facilities are private, Jackson mused. No oversight, unlimited funding, no ethical review boards. Who knows what he's been doing out there? We need to get her to tell her full story, Morgan decided. But this method is too slow and exhausting for her. He turned to Simone. Is there any way we can facilitate communication? Something easier than scratching on concrete? Simone considered this. I could rig up a simple communication board, letters she could point to with her paw. It wouldn't be fast, but it would be less physically taxing. While Simone worked on creating the makeshift communication board, Morgan sat near Lucy's enclosure, his mind still reeling from the revelation. We're going to help you, he promised. Whatever it takes. Lucy met his gaze, and Morgan was struck again by the human intelligence behind those blue eyes. How had he not seen it immediately? The awareness, the understanding, it went beyond even the most intelligent animal cognition. By morning, they had pieced together Lucy's story through painstaking communication. She had been conducting field research on endangered species conservation when she discovered evidence of Thorne's illegal activities, exotic animal trafficking, forcing endangered species to fight for the entertainment of wealthy clients, and gruesome experiments combining genetic material from different species. When she threatened to expose him, Thorne had her kidnapped and used as a test subject for his most ambitious experiment yet, human-animal genetic modification. The process had been excruciating, erasing her ability to speak or communicate as a human while transforming her physically into a white tiger, a particularly valuable specimen in the illegal exotic animal trade. "But why keep you alive at all?" William wondered. "It seems like an unnecessary risk." Lucy's response was chilling. "Testcaseplaned. "A test case," Morgan repeated grimly, "with more transformations planned." "We need to stop him," Simone said firmly. "But we still need evidence that would stand up in court." Jackson had been unusually quiet, making notes and occasionally stepping outside to make calls. He returned now with a determined expression. "I might have something," he announced. "I've been in contact with an old law school friend who works for the FBI's Environmental Crimes Division. They've had Thorne on their radar for suspected wildlife trafficking, but haven't been able to gather enough evidence for a warrant." "And now?" Morgan prompted. "With what we've learned from Lucy, plus the medical evidence Simone has documented, my contact thinks they can convince a judge, but it's risky. If we're wrong about any of this—" "We're not wrong," Morgan said with certainty, looking at Lucy, "and we're running out of time. Thorne will be back with reinforcements, legal or otherwise." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity. Jackson worked with his FBI contact to secure a search warrant. Simone documented every piece of medical evidence and began researching possible ways to reverse Lucy's condition, though the prospects seemed grim, without understanding Thorne's exact methodology. Morgan focused on Lucy's care and comfort, ensuring she had everything she needed while continuing to communicate through the letterboard Simone had created. Despite her physical transformation, Lucy's human personality began to emerge more clearly. Her determination, her intelligence, and occasionally flashes of surprising humor despite her dire situation. "They're here," William announced from the sanctuary's front entrance. "A lot of them." Morgan looked out to see several official vehicles pulling into the driveway, FBI agents, state police, even representatives from Fish and Wildlife Services. But most concerning was the black SUV following behind them. Thorne had arrived as well. "Stay with Lucy," Morgan instructed William. "Don't let anyone near her without my approval." Outside, the scene was controlled chaos as agents organized themselves for the raid on Thorne's compound. Thorne himself stood to one side, his usual composure replaced by barely contained fury, as an agent explained the search warrant. "This is preposterous," Thorne was saying as Morgan approached. "Based on what evidence? The word of a wildlife rehabilitator with a personal vendetta against me?" "The evidence was sufficient for a federal judge to issue the warrant, Mr. Thorne," the lead FBI agent replied coolly. "If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." Thorne spotted Morgan, and his expression darkened. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, Sullivan. My work is beyond your comprehension." "Experimenting on humans?" Morgan replied quietly, just between the two of them. "Turning people into animals? Is that the work you're so proud of, Thorne?" For just a moment, Thorne's mask slipped, revealing genuine shock. "How did you—" He caught himself, but it was too late. "She told us everything," Morgan continued, pressing his advantage. "Lucy Gray is alive, Thorne, and she remembers exactly what you did to her." Before Thorne could respond, the FBI agent interrupted. "Mr. Sullivan, we have a team ready to examine the tiger. Our forensic veterinarian wants to take samples immediately." "Not yet," Morgan said firmly. "There's something you need to see first." Inside the isolation room, Lucy had been listening to their arrival. When Morgan entered with the FBI agent, she immediately approached the front of the enclosure and began to use the letterboard, pointing to letters one by one with her massive paw. IAMLUCYGRAY. The FBI agent stared in stunned silence, his professional composure cracking at the impossible scene before him. "She's been missing for years," Morgan explained quietly, "presumed dead, until we found her on that cliff." "This is impossible," the agent murmured. "And yet it's happening right in front of you," Morgan replied. Thorne has been conducting illegal genetic experiments using humans as test subjects. Lucy is the proof. The agent pulled out his phone, his hands visibly unsteady. I need the forensic team in here now, and someone get me the director on the line. What followed was a flurry of activity that Morgan would later recall only in fragments. Teams of agents departed for Thorne's compound, while others remained at the sanctuary to document Lucy's condition and her astonishing ability to communicate. DNA testing was expedited, with preliminary results confirming the presence of human genetic material interwoven with tiger DNA in a way that defied conventional scientific understanding. Thorne was taken into custody, his cool facade finally crumbling as the evidence against him mounted. The raid on his compound uncovered horrors beyond even what Lucy had described. Dozens of endangered animals kept in deplorable conditions, fighting rings stained with blood, and most damning of all, a sophisticated laboratory where his genetic experiments had been conducted. In a hidden room behind the laboratory, agents discovered meticulous records of Thorne's work, including the process he had used on Lucy. Most disturbing were plans for additional test subjects, other environmental activists and researchers who had gotten too close to his operations. 3 days after the raid, Morgan sat with Simone in her office, reviewing the latest reports. The good news, Simone said cautiously, is that Thorne's records include notes on reversing the process. He apparently considered it important to be able to undo the transformation if necessary. Morgan felt a surge of hope. So Lucy can be restored to her human form. Simone's expression remained guarded. Theoretically, but the process is experimental, dangerous, and would require specialized equipment and expertise. The FBI has assembled a team of geneticists and medical professionals to evaluate the possibility. What are her chances? Honestly, unknown. This is unprecedented territory. Simone hesitated. There's something else you should know. Lucy's communication has been becoming more limited. The tiger DNA appears to be gradually overwhelming the human elements. If we don't act soon, the implication hung heavily in the air. Lucy might lose her human consciousness entirely, becoming truly just a tiger despite her origins. Morgan spent that evening with Lucy, sharing the news about the potential reversal process and its risks. Despite the limitations of their communication method, her response was clear. She wanted to try, regardless of the danger. PREFERDEATHTOTRAPPED. The procedure was scheduled for the following week at a secure medical facility. As Morgan helped prepare Lucy for transport, he was struck by a surprising sense of loss. Despite the horror of her situation, he had formed a connection with this extraordinary being, neither fully tiger nor fully human, but something uniquely in between. I'll be there when you wake up, he promised. Now whatever happens, Lucy touched her paw to the glass one last time, her blue eyes conveying what words could not. The transformation procedure took 18 hours. 18 hours during which Morgan paced the waiting room, refusing food or rest, despite his colleagues' concerns. When the lead scientist finally emerged, his exhausted expression revealed nothing. We've done everything we can, he said simply. Now we wait. Another 24 hours passed before Morgan was allowed to see her. He entered the recovery room with trepidation, not knowing what or who he would find. The woman lying in the hospital bed bore little resemblance to the Lucy Gray from the photographs they'd found. Her hair had turned completely white, and distinctive striping patterns marked her skin like pale scars. But she was undeniably human in form again. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached, the same startling blue as the tiger's had been. "Morgan," she whispered, her voice rough from years of disuse. He took her hand gently. "You remember?" "Everything," she confirmed. "Being the tiger, you saving me, all of it." The doctors had warned that her recovery would be long and complex. Her muscles needed to relearn human movements, her vocal cords required therapy to function properly, and the psychological trauma of her experience would leave scars deeper than the physical marks on her skin. But as the weeks passed, Lucy's remarkable resilience became apparent. She worked tirelessly with physical therapists, speech pathologists, and psychologists. Though she would never fully return to her former self, the tiger would always be a part of her now. Visible in her distinctive appearance and occasionally in her movements and instincts, she was reclaiming her humanity day by day. Thorne's trial became a media sensation, exposing a network of wealthy individuals who had participated in his illegal animal fighting rings and special demonstrations of his experimental subjects. The evidence against him was overwhelming, ensuring he would spend the remainder of his life in prison. 6 months after her transformation back to human form, Lucy visited the sanctuary for the first time. Morgan watched as she moved through the facility, stopping to observe each rescued animal with a unique understanding no other human could claim. "How does it feel?" he asked when they paused by the tiger enclosure, now home to several rescued tigers from Thorne's compound. Lucy considered the question. "Strange," she admitted. "I understand them in ways I never could before, even as a zoologist. Their fears, their needs, their joy." She turned to Morgan, her blue eyes intense. "That's why I've decided to stay." "Stay?" "Here, at the sanctuary." She smiled, showing just a hint of something wild. "If you'll have me." Morgan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of something that had been building since those moments on the cliff edge. "We'd be honored. Your perspective would be invaluable." In the months and years that followed, the Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary flourished under their combined leadership. Lucy's unique insights revolutionized their rehabilitation techniques, while her story, carefully controlled in its public details to protect her privacy, brought attention and funding to their conservation efforts. The white streaks in her hair never faded, nor did the faint striping patterns on her skin. Occasionally, in moments of stress or strong emotion, her pupils would elongate slightly, a reminder of her dual nature. But Lucy embraced these remnants of her time as a tiger, understanding they were not a curse, but rather a rare gift of perspective. On the anniversary of her rescue, Morgan found Lucy standing at the edge of the sanctuary property, looking out over the valley toward the cliffs where they had first encountered each other. "Any regrets?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. She considered this, then shook her head. "I wouldn't have chosen this path. The pain, the fear, the loss of self, it was horrific beyond words." She turned to face him, her expression softening. "But it brought me here. It showed me what people are capable of, both the cruelty of someone like Thorne and the compassion of someone like you." Morgan felt the weight of those words, remembering his desperate lunge to save a tiger from falling, never imagining the true nature of the life he was saving, or how it would transform his own. "I learned something too," he admitted, "about assumptions and appearances, about seeing beyond the surface." Lucy smiled, her eyes reflecting the setting sun. "I think that's what we're all really after, isn't it? To be truly seen for who we are, not what we appear to be." As they walked back toward the sanctuary together, a distant tiger's roar echoed across the valley, a sound that once would have been just animal noise to Morgan's ears, but now carried layers of meaning he was still learning to understand. Lucy had taught him that the boundaries between human and animal were more permeable than he'd ever imagined, not through Thorne's monstrous experiments, but through the simple truth that compassion transcends species. In saving her, he had glimpsed a deeper understanding of what connected all living things, the universal desire for freedom, dignity, and the courage to become one's true self, whatever form that might take. And in that understanding lay the most unexpected gift of all, the knowledge that sometimes it takes seeing through another's eyes to truly find your own path forward. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of captivating stories. I trust you found today's narrative as engaging as I did. If you enjoyed this exploration into fascinating and compelling narratives, kindly indicate your appreciation by liking this video. Are you watching on mobile? Show your appreciation with a double tap for hype. For more captivating stories and journeys into the heart of compelling storytelling, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss a single upload. Your thoughts and interpretations are most welcome. Please share your perspectives on today's story in the comments below. And if you believe others would find this content engaging, please consider sharing the video with your network. Until our next journey into the world of captivating tales, I bid you farewell.